In 2012, Harold Henthorne claimed that his wife Toni had died in a hiking accident after falling 140 feet off a cliff in Rocky Mountain National Park. On the day of their 12th wedding anniversary, Harold insisted on a strenuous hike up Deer Mountain despite Toni's bad knee and limited hiking experience. After her fall, he gave investigators multiple conflicting accounts, repeatedly changing what he said he was doing at the moment she fell over the edge. Investigators later found a map in his car with the exact location of her death marked with an X, and uncovered that his spouse before Toni had also died years earlier under mysterious circumstances. Toni's death closely resembled the 1995 death of Lynn Henthorne, who was crushed beneath a Jeep on a remote Colorado road when it supposedly slipped off a jack. Harold claimed both deaths were merely accidents, but prosecutors argued the similarities were far too extreme to be considered coincidence. In 2015, he was convicted of murdering Toni Henthorne and sentenced to life in prison. In October of 2024, Micah Smith took his 3 young children, ages 2, 4, and 8, on a 9-mile hike in Utah that authorities described as extremely difficult and dangerous, especially as a major storm was rolling in. Court records say Smith failed to check the weather and continued climbing, even after sending photos of the incoming storm to his wife, who urged him to turn back. Investigators say he refused, later telling police he was comfortable hiking in the dark without lights. By the time they reached the summit around 6 p.m., hail and snow had started falling. The family began descending, but only made it about 600 feet before one child fell and struck their head. At that point, Smith decided to shelter in place overnight with the children, despite worsening weather and inadequate clothing. During the night, prosecutors say the children repeatedly said they were cold, exhausted, and wanted to go home. One child allegedly begged Smith to turn back earlier, saying she was afraid she might not survive, but he refused, calling the hike a once-in-a-lifetime experience. Court documents state Smith later claimed he performed CPR on his son overnight and instructed his daughter to continue the CPR before leaving his children behind. When search and rescue teams located Smith the next day, he was all alone and appeared completely unconcerned about his kids, telling responders he believed one of his children was already dead. A helicopter crew later found the 3 children together, severely hypothermic and inadequately clothed. All 3 children ultimately survived, though 2 were in critical condition, and one had a core body temperature of 63 degrees Fahrenheit that led to a stroke and emergency brain surgery. Smith was later charged with aggravated child abuse and child torture, with prosecutors requesting no bail, arguing he repeatedly chose to continue, despite warnings from the children, their mother, and the worsening weather. In 2015, Florida mother Melanie Joyce Alexander was arrested after her 11-year-old daughter walked into school wearing a t-shirt basically exposing everything happening at home, and she had the bruises to prove it. The shirt declared she'd gotten a good whooping for bad grades, but teachers immediately noticed belt-shaped welts across her arms, legs, and lower back. Investigators say Melanie forced her to wear the shirt so the entire school would see why she'd been beaten, turning the punishment into a mix of public humiliation and physical abuse. The child was taken into protective custody, and Melanie was charged with felony child abuse, a case that went viral because the t-shirt meant to shame the girl ended up exposing the mother's crimes instead. Walter Francis White was a black civil rights investigator who looked completely white, and he used that to slip into some of the most dangerous places during the Jim Crow era. He infiltrated lynch mobs, KKK meetings, and towns still soaked in violence after a killing, quietly collecting names, methods, and first-hand accounts from men who had no idea they were talking to an NAACP investigator. His cover was blown on various occasions, forcing him to flee as armed mobs put a bounty on his head, and he later said he only survived by outrunning men who fully intended to hang him. The reports he gathered remain some of the most detailed records of lynching in American history, documenting crimes most officials refuse to even acknowledge. Eddie Murphy's childhood was shaped by sudden violence long before he became famous. When he was about 7 years old, his biological father, Charles Edward Murphy, was shot and killed during a domestic dispute involving his girlfriend. The killing abruptly removed his father from his life, leaving Murphy and his brother to grow up without him. The loss is rarely mentioned in discussions of his personal life, and Murphy himself has rarely addressed it publicly. In 2025, 35-year-old Michael Virgil died on board a Royal Caribbean cruise after allegedly being served more than 30 alcoholic drinks in a single day, according to a wrongful death lawsuit filed by his family. Court filings state that Virgil showed clear signs of severe intoxication before experiencing a violent outburst, during which he became disoriented and aggressive. Crew members restrained him as his condition worsened, and he later collapsed. Virgil was eventually pronounced dead on board, and his body was stored in the ship's refrigerated morgue until the vessel returned to port. The Los Angeles County Medical Examiner later ruled his death a homicide, citing acute alcohol intoxication and restraint-related factors, and his family is seeking accountability from the cruise line for alleged overserving and failures in response. OF creator Bonnie Blue has been arrested in Bali after police raided a villa suspected of being used to film explicit content. 16 men were detained with her, but while most were released, Bonnie and 2 British men were held as officers seized phones and cameras based on a tip from inside the villa. She's now in immigration custody, questioned daily and without her passport, as officials prepare a court hearing and consider deportation in a long-term blacklist. Under Indonesia's morality laws, producing pornographic content can carry up to 15 years in prison. Mary Carol McDonnell, a 73-year-old former true crime TV producer, allegedly conned banks by posing as the heiress to an $80 million trust fund that never existed, securing nearly $30 million in fraudulent loans, including a $15 million payout she was never qualified to receive. But before the scheme unraveled, she completely disappeared, leaving behind a federal indictment, multiple aliases, and lenders scrambling to recover their losses. With possible ties to Los Angeles, Alabama, and Dubai, she was added to the FBI's most wanted list in 2025 as one of the country's most elusive white-collar fugitives. Before fame, Shania Twain was already carrying adult burdens as a child, singing in bars until 1 a.m. at the age of 8 just to help keep her family afloat. But in 1987, that fragile stability was suddenly destroyed when her mother and stepfather were killed in a violent car accident after their vehicle was struck head-on by a truck driven by a drunk driver. Shania was only 22 when she became the legal guardian of her 4 younger siblings, putting her music career on hold to raise them and keep the family together, stepping into survival mode years before the world ever knew her name. Christopher Tapp spent more than 20 years in prison for the 1996 murder of 18-year-old Angie Dodge, a crime he didn't commit. Police had coerced a false confession out of him, even though none of the DNA at the scene matched. In 2019, genetic genealogy finally identified the real killer, leading to Tapp's full exoneration and a record-breaking $11.7 million settlement he received in 2022. But less than a year after finally reclaiming his life, Tapp was found beaten and unresponsive in a Las Vegas hotel room after an altercation. The coroner ruled his death a homicide, and a former pro wrestler was later charged. J. Carey, a former Irish hurling legend, was jailed after admitting he spent years faking a cancer diagnosis to scam friends and contacts out of nearly £350,000. Prosecutors revealed he sent staged photos showing what appeared to be medical tubing in his nose, later exposed as an iPhone charging cable taped to his face. He claimed the money was urgently needed for treatment, exploiting sympathy and trust while continuing the deception. The scheme collapsed when victims grew suspicious, and authorities confirmed he never even had cancer at all. Carey pleaded guilty to multiple fraud charges and was sentenced to more than 5 years in prison. A man once spent nearly 5 months locked inside Rikers Island without realizing he could have walked free at any point for just $2. Court records later showed a judge had ordered his release only a week after he was arrested for a nonviolent offense, setting an absurdly low bail, but his lawyer never told him. With no one informing him of his status, he remained trapped inside one of the most notoriously violent jail complexes in the United States, a place long plagued by assaults, gang activity, neglect, and inmate murders. By the time the mistake had been discovered, months of his life had already been lost to one of the most dangerous detention systems in the country. This woman's life has been changed forever by a random horrific attack that lasted only a few seconds. 46-year-old Ashley Wazalewski was suddenly attacked without warning while walking near Forsyth Park in Savannah, Georgia, after attending a Christmas program at a nearby church on December 10, 2025. A stranger had approached her from behind and poured a corrosive chemical directly over her head, causing immediate catastrophic burns. The liquid ate through her clothing, burned deep into her skin, and was so caustic it melted a key fob in her pocket as it spread across her body. She suffered second and third degree burns over more than half her body, including her face and scalp, and began screaming as her clothes started burning off her skin. The attacker didn't take anything from her and simply fled the scene within seconds. A good Samaritan rushed in to help as she wailed in agony and called her family. Wazalewski was quickly transferred to the Augusta Burn Center, where doctors say recovery will involve prolonged hospitalization, multiple surgeries, and permanent scarring. As of the latest updates, the attacker has not yet been identified or arrested. This was the moment when a quiet shopping afternoon at a California mall erupted into chaos, as roughly 25 masked intruders stormed a jewelry store in San Ramon in September of 2025. Surveillance footage shows the group rushing in almost simultaneously, smashing glass display cases with crowbars as customers and employees scrambled for safety. The entire robbery unfolded in less than 2 minutes, with suspects scooping up over $1 million in jewelry. When security doors partially locked, trapping some of them inside, at least one suspect fired a gun at the door to force an escape. The group then scattered into multiple waiting vehicles, several later confirmed stolen, triggering a nationwide police response and pursuit. Investigators described the robbery as highly coordinated and pre-planned, with roles assigned and several lookouts positioned outside, and said it mirrored a growing wave of increasingly aggressive mob-style jewelry heists in the area. Several suspects were arrested in the days that followed, facing robbery, conspiracy, and weapons charges, but authorities say most of the suspects involved in the coordinated heist remain at large. This is the facial reconstruction created from a severed human head found in an Illinois park in 1993, the only clue investigators had for nearly 3 decades. The victim remained unidentified until 2022, when DNA genealogy revealed she was Susan Lund, who disappeared on Christmas Eve in 1992 after walking to a nearby store. Despite finally learning her name almost 30 years later, the rest of her body was never recovered. No suspect was ever charged, and her murder remains unsolved. This is a decorative tower filled with thousands of shaved human jawbone fragments, removed from patients during cosmetic jaw reduction surgeries in South Korea. The display came from a Seoul plastic surgery clinic, where the surgeon stacked discarded pieces of patients' faces into stacked columns to represent how many operations he had performed. The towers sparked public backlash and were later removed after authorities fined the clinic for violating medical waste laws requiring human remains to be incinerated. The case became a disturbing symbol of how normalized extreme facial alteration has become in South Korea, to the point that many patients have even reported being questioned at border control because their faces no longer match their passport photos. YouTube prankster Vitaly rose to fame in the early 2010s for viral public stunts built around shock, confrontation, and pushing social boundaries. But as his platform grew, those stunts increasingly crossed into real-world violence. In 2014, he was arrested in Miami after physically attacking a woman in what he called a prank. Years later, Vitaly admitted he was high on psychedelic mushrooms when he punched another woman in the face, a completely unprovoked assault that left her with serious facial injuries requiring hospitalization. In 2016, he escalated further by carrying out a bomb hoax at LAX that caused mass panic and resulted in criminal convictions. In 2022, he was detained again after running onto the field during the FIFA World Cup in Qatar, interrupting a live international match and being forcibly removed by security. Afterward, Vitaly's behavior only continued to deteriorate, culminating in his arrest in the Philippines in April of 2025 after a series of live-streamed incidents in Manila where he was filmed harassing mall security guards, confronting random civilians, trespassing on private property, and allegedly stealing a security guard's phone during an altercation. Philippine authorities classified the conduct as harassment, theft, and public disorder, charging him with various offenses including unjust vexation. He's currently detained at a jail facility in Taguig while awaiting trial, and has not been deported after both the United States and Russia declined to accept him. Vitaly has already spent around 8 months in pretrial detention, and if convicted, he faces up to 18 months in a Philippine prison, following a steady escalation from viral stunts to criminal charges. Nicknamed the Merchant of Death, Russian arms dealer Viktor Bout rose to power after the fall of the Soviet Union in the early 1990s. Using his fleet of 60 cargo planes, the arms he's brokered have helped fuel conflicts in countries including Afghanistan, Angola, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Somalia, Rwanda, Liberia, Sudan, and Sierra Leone. Willing to sell weapons to anyone who wanted them, Bout has supplied both sides of multiple civil wars and is said to be responsible for the deaths of tens of millions of people. He was arrested during a sting operation in 2008 where he was caught selling surface-to-air missiles that would have been used to kill American troops. But Viktor Bout is now free thanks to a prisoner swap for WNBA player Brittany Griner, who was arrested 6 months ago after trying to bring a THC cartridge on a Russian airplane. In 1959, a white man named John Howard Griffin disguised himself as a black man and traveled through the Deep South for 6 weeks. After writing a book about his experiences with racism, he was forced to move to Mexico for several years due to the barrage of death threats. Albert Einstein died at the age of 76 after refusing to undergo surgery on his heart. He was quoted saying, "I want to go when I want. It is tasteless to prolong life artificially. I have done my share, it's time to go. I will do so elegantly." In September of 1974, 18-year-old Milika Kostic was lured to a 12th-floor apartment by 5 men who attempted to assault her. When given the chance, she decided to jump from the apartment window and fell about 120 feet onto a cafe awning below. She died 2 days later, but was conscious for long enough to give police a full description of the awful incident. When Eminem was a heavy user, he would swallow handfuls of pills without even knowing what they were. In 2007, he once overdosed on so much methadone that doctors informed him he was only 2 hours away from dying. It was such a wake-up call that he quit drugs almost immediately and has remained sober ever since. American soldier Henry Gunther was the last man to die during World War I. At 10:59 a.m. on November 11, 1918, he bravely charged at a German roadblock filled with armed soldiers. The Germans tried waving him off, knowing that the armistice would be signed within a few moments. But he apparently got too close, fired a couple rounds, and was killed instantly. In 1871, Ohio lawyer Clement Vallandigham was defending a client who was charged with murder. While showing the court how the victim might have accidentally shot himself, Clement accidentally shot himself. He won the case, but he died. This 1994 photo shows O.J. Simpson holding hands with his children at the funeral of their mother and his ex-wife, Nicole Simpson Brown. She was brutally stabbed to death, most likely by O.J. himself, even though he was famously acquitted in court a few months later. During the funeral, O.J. reportedly spent a significant amount of time with Nicole's body and was even seen kissing her on the lips. Up until 1974, it was illegal to appear in public in the city of Chicago if you were ugly, and each offense was subject to a fine. The law was primarily made to prevent people with disabilities from going outside. While on his deathbed and completely unable to speak due to throat cancer, famous author Aldous Huxley wrote his final request to his wife to be given 100 micrograms of LSD. So she injected him with 2 separate doses of acid, and he died just a few hours later while tripping balls. In 2003, a skeleton measuring 6 inches long was found in a remote part of Chile's Atacama Desert. Due to its elongated skull and rather developed bones considering its size, the specimen was initially rumored to be an alien. But after extensive testing, scientists determined that it was more likely the skeleton of a stillborn human girl that had close to 70 different genetic mutations. According to a recent study, people in the US who were born before 1996 have a slightly lower IQ than those born afterwards. This is due to the negative effects of leaded gasoline, which was finally banned completely on January 1st, 1996. In 1924, gifted college students Leopold and Loeb planned out the perfect murders simply to demonstrate their superior intellectual abilities. But after kidnapping and murdering a child, they left an abundance of evidence and were swiftly convicted of murder. For 24 years, Missouri woman Gypsy Blanchard pretended that her daughter Gypsy had multiple chronic conditions. She claimed her daughter suffered from leukemia, asthma, muscular dystrophy, and had the mental capacity of a 7-year-old. Dee forced her to stay in a wheelchair and act disabled, subjecting her to many unnecessary surgeries and medications. Gypsy was often fed through a feeding tube and supplied air through an oxygen tank. Her mother also regularly shaved the girl's head to give her the appearance of a cancer patient. Whenever Gypsy suggested that she wasn't actually sick, her mother would physically harm her. In 2015, Gypsy was finally tired of her mother's horrific abuse and sent her boyfriend to stab Dee 17 times in the back. Today, Gypsy is still serving out her 10-year sentence after pleading guilty to second-degree murder of her abusive mother. This iconic photograph of 28-year-old Marcy Borders covered in dust was taken just after the World Trade Center collapsed on 9/11. Marcy was a bank teller who worked on the 81st floor of the North Tower. She survived the collapse, but sadly died from cancer in 2014, likely caused by the toxic fumes she was exposed to. This is the gravestone of H.R. Giger, the Swiss artist and sculptor who designed the creatures for the movie Alien. On a British Airways flight in 1995, a woman was complaining of chest pain, so 2 doctors came over to check on her. They quickly realized she was suffering from a punctured lung and required immediate surgery. But the problem was they couldn't land for help since the increase in air pressure could kill her. So they performed mid-air surgery on her using a coat hanger, silverware, and a bottle of cognac for sterilization. Within 10 minutes, they'd saved her life. According to his former doctor, Michael Jackson's father had him chemically castrated as a young boy. He reportedly did this so that Michael would maintain his high-pitched singing voice into adulthood. The skin of certain fish species can be grafted onto severe burns and diabetic wounds. The material recruits the body's own cells and is eventually converted into living tissue. Located in Paris, this is the tomb of legendary scientist Marie Curie. It's lined with an inch thick of lead since her remains are still radioactive to this day. A Nile crocodile named Gustave has killed as many as 300 people in Burundi over the last 50 years. He's evaded dozens of capture and murder attempts as he can be identified by the 3 bullet scars on his body. The 2,000-pound monster croc is already nearly 20 feet long and is said to be still growing to this day. The short-faced bear was once the most abundant bear in all of North America until it went extinct around 11,000 BC. Some scientists argue that these massive bears delayed human migration into North America because they kept killing men trying to cross the Bering Strait. Heart Attack Grill is a restaurant in Las Vegas where customers over 350 pounds eat for free. The only vegan option on the menu is cigarettes, and up to 3 people have died from heart attacks while eating there. In 1940, Walt Disney hired 11 little people to dress up as Pinocchio and wave to people at the movie's premiere. He left them on a theater balcony with enough food and wine for the day, but there was no way for them to get down. By late afternoon, they had all taken off their thick, sweaty costumes and were naked, drunk, and swearing at parents and their children. Prior to filming The Dark Knight, Heath Ledger locked himself in a hotel room and talked to only himself for 6 straight weeks. He said this helped him land more in the realm of a psychopath to prepare for his iconic role of the Joker. Many believe this extreme dedication was partially responsible for his accidental overdose on sleeping pills the next year. A horrific bungee cord injury caused this man's iris to completely collapse. Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma used to be the wealthiest black community in all of America. That was until 1921 when a mob of white supremacists attacked the community with the help of the National Guard. Using guns, explosives, and even airplanes, they decimated 35 square blocks of the neighborhood and murdered hundreds of African Americans. It's known today as the Black Wall Street Massacre.